what I wanted to encourage people is if you go on the top, Debbie, this is the same for Mac and PC for screen sharing and Zoom. So right now I'm screen sharing my talk, and I want this to create discussion. So if you go to the top right corner and click on view, you can see that the option is side-by-side gallery. And at least on my laptop, I can change how big the screen share is and how big the gallery is.
I can as well. If anyone else is having, oh, that's really nice. For me on a PC, it was actually in the center of the screen and under view options.
And then the other thing I like to do, I'm sorry to all of you. I'm happy to see all of you non-video participants, but you can hide non-video participants so that we are looking at the faces that want to be seen.
And where is that? Under video, I see standard side-by-side speakers, side-by-side gallery.
If you go to a video of a non-video participant, if you go to their little box, you can press those 3 dots and it'll say hide non-video participants.
Thank you, that's lovely.
Okay, now I'm ready for you to record.
I'm sorry, I started recording a little bit ago when you said, are you ready? And I was like, sounds like you are.
Well, that was the first thing of my talk for teaching people how to do that. I got to the point where I was proud enough of this that I could invite my family, and I knew that they would contribute enough to a rich discussion. So yes, Spencer, exactly. I would love to hear it. I have an example. We're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to talk about preschool children, and we're going to talk about elementary school children, and we've got one of each. I agreed with Karen 1 week ago today to give the talk today. So 1 week ago, I decided I would do it, but the talk has really been a year in the making, because 1 year ago, more or less, the mother of a beautiful Black 4-year-old child whom I have been taking care of since he was born. I'm having a talk as a pediatrician, asked me essentially, what are you doing to take care of children like my son? She asked it in a very respectful way. I have a 4-year relationship with this mother, and she shared that she had a conversation with a girlfriend who found out that this boy's pediatrician was a white female. And she said, what could this woman have? Don't you want somebody else? And I really thought about that. I really had to know, what am I doing to take care of children like her son? And through one of my pediatric podcasts, probably June 2020, of course, it's in my resources, I heard what this talk is all about. And it was, how does a pediatrician help parents navigate the discussions of race? So I can never tell you it's the name of the child, but I have since had my follow-up with the kid. I've had his 5-year-old checkup, and I told the mom, this is my project for your son. And I don't know if that was meaningful to her, but it was meaningful to me to know that I'm doing something. So again, my name is Sandy Cohan. By day, I'm a pediatrician. By night, I'm a mother and CBS member from near and far in time. And today we're going to talk about how to talk to your kids about race and why it is so essential. This is meant to be a discussion. You are welcome to interrupt me at any time, provide comments. I may go back to the topic instead of having the conversation, but they say that you should always set the rules ahead of time. So, of the many TED Talks that I watch when I am horizontal and recovering from being a mother and pediatrician, I heard this line that stood out to me. We tell children that race is real, but that race doesn't matter. The opposite is actually true. Race is not real, but race does matter. And this is something that I've really struggled with because race is an entirely social construct. There is no biological basis. There is a lot of history, and it's still in medicine that we need to calculate things differently. When I was in medical school, we had to present race as part of the patient because that was supposed to be meaningful. So if race isn't real, how do I support people in celebrating their Black identity, be okay with my white identity, and how do we work together to eliminate barriers based on? And what kept coming to me over and over again was this quote from Pirkei Avot. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. It is not your responsibility to finish the work of protecting the world, but neither are you free to desist from it either. So I also learned that it's customary to study Pirkei Avot during the Omer. So we've done that.
Quick comment. Yes, Shira's been trying to ask a question.
I have a question before you, from the last slide. Aren't there certain medical things that do make a difference?
Nope, not anymore. The more we look at it, so we're learning more about it, but the more we look at it, it's not race. There may be, we're going to talk about how racism is a disease, but your race does not create, racism is the disease. That's what I want to say. So there are medical calculators in calculating kidney function. We're learning there's no basis for it. We're learning that there's risk factors associated with certain ethnicities. The amount of melanin in a patient's skin doesn't contribute to a person's health because of the melanin.
So what if somebody comes in with something and you don't think about a certain thing that it could be, but their race could tell you that maybe it is that thing? Does that make sense?
Not exactly. Let's continue.
Okay.
So I really couldn't give a talk about race and racism without using certain language that I think is so important to understand. So racism, as I said, is literally a disease. And this disease is what causes health disparities. We're not going to talk about how that impacts child health. There is a concept that we're learning about called adverse childhood events, or ACEs. And these are adverse events that happen to children that literally lead to bad health outcomes: coronary heart disease, hypertension, anxiety, depression. We're not going to talk about that. We're not going to identify or provide a framework for racism. the structural racism that exists, the personal mediated racism, the internalized racism. And we're certainly not going to go into the amount of time that we need to become anti-racist. But essentially what we're doing is we're going to understand how racial bias works in children and how we as parents and grandparents and community members can help them learn to react to racial differences. So I was reading a book, I think Jacob was 3, and there was a chapter about why white parents don't talk to their children about race. And if you know anything about me, you know that racism and race has been a long part of my life. And I think I'm doing a great job raising my children because I'm just perfect. So I decide to test it out on Jacob. And I say, hey, bud, do you think everybody in your class looks the same? He says, yeah, they all look the same. I said, really? I mean, they all have the same hair color. He goes, wait, maybe not. And he mentions 2 kids that are Black. And he says, their hair matches. They match. And I said, you want to know something interesting? People call their skin black, even though it's not really the color black. And he gives me the best Jacob face. Huh? And I said, you know, they call our skin white, even though it's not the color white. Again, what are you talking about? And here I'm like, I failed. I've totally failed. And I think while I know I didn't fail, there are many things I do differently. Isn't that the part of going down this path? So how do children learn about racial bias? We're going to talk about what are strategies that we can help children learn to deal with racial bias. And I'll provide throughout the time resources to help you address it. When you give a talk, everybody knows that you tell them what you're going to say, you say it, and then you tell them what you said. So that's this slide. This is everything. There's nothing else. This is the short version. We're going to actually talk about these things throughout the slide, but now on for the long version. So let's start with, how do children learn racial bias? And so again, as a pediatrician, I wanted to appropriately communicate what are typical expected social emotional milestones. And of all the different graphs that I could find, I went back to the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have now updated the Caring for Your Baby and Young Child. I pulled out my free copy that I stole from my residency program. Apparently that's the 5th edition. So these babies are really, really cute, right? 1 to 3 months, they're learning to smile. They really like feeling good. They just want to enjoy things. Their happiness is what is the only thing that is expressed. And they're following our facial movements. They don't really have control over those hands and those feet things. They can't really do much on their own. But socially and emotionally, they're really making a lot of progress. So then we move on to 4 through 7 months, and they really are, again, becoming more social. They're looking at mirror things, mirror objects. They really respond to people a lot more. And so I can't provide examples of people without their consent, although I did of my family. But we've got Mira at 6 months, happens to be Debbie's wedding, happens to have my father there. And look, she's engaging with my father. They're both smiling. Look, my daughter was very typical. Then from 8 to 12 months, they are learning that things they're not familiar with, they're a little bit more uncomfortable. They know the people that make them feel good, and they know the people that that don't. So it took me a while because I needed to represent Jacob. And he's always smiling. That kid is always smiling. So I found him in this big crowd of non-COVID friendly people. Kid is not sure what's going over. on. I just put him down. I walk away and he's supposed to smile, not having it. But don't worry, a second later, kid's up and smiling because that's my son. So this is where they learn bias. The newborns are showing no preference when to anybody. We know that children as young as 3 days old can recognize their mother's face when they show a picture of all these other faces. But by 3 months, they're already preferring to look at pictures from their own race. And then by 6 to 9 months, they associate people from their own race with happiness. That is what they're comfortable with. So when we don't expose our children to individuals of other races, we're setting up for bias. Babies, children are trying to categorize their world, but they don't have negative thoughts about the other groups. They're just comfortable. This is not racism. So racial bias is different than racism. By definition, racism is directing a negative judgment against somebody because of their race. So we're getting a little, heavy looking about this stuff. I wanted a break. So I provided another cute picture of my white children, and they're cute. So let's go to the 2 to 4 year olds. Spence man, how old are you now? Tell everybody.
4.
You are 4. So by age 2 to 4, kiddos are playing those role plays, they're identifying things, they're noticing differences, and they're categorizing it. So this was my project I started because of that boy. At the 3-year-old checkup, in addition to talking about potty training and healthy eating and how to direct kids about noticing their gender, I bring up that it's important to also encourage your children to notice the differences that they notice in race. Kids are also noticing how people get treated differently because of their race, whether or not we want to see it. They can also sense approval and disapproval. So when they bring something up and we're comfortable about it, they absolutely know, I guess we can't talk about it. And the point is, they always want to talk about it at a very inconvenient time. So guess what? We've got about a decade, because by preschool, they've already internalized their racial bias. By 12, they're pretty set in their beliefs. I'm screwed. My kids are 11 and 13. I know a lot of yours are grown. Again, I think this is important for us to understand because it applies to so many people. So the rest of the time, we'll talk about how do we decrease the bias and improve cultural understanding. So back to the how did children learn? What are those strategies? And the biggest thing is lean in. I know that wasn't the talk about for race, but lean in, don't brush it aside. It's gonna come up when we are caught off guard. Our immediate reaction is to shush them, to, we're not gonna talk about that, we don't say that. Instead, we're gonna start to ask questions if we don't already. What do you think about that? And we can build from there. So these are our strategies. I'm gonna talk to your children. And we're going to talk about how to talk to your children. At the preschool age, we're supporting our children when they point out the differences to people around us. We need to have certain messages at different stages, engaging them in what they can handle. On the left, I've got pretty generic, happy things. We're different, we're the same. Everywhere Babies happens to be a book that I had. I will admit I did not pick it because of the exposures, but at least I did something right by reading it to my children. There's more explicit books such as Julius Lester's Let's Talk About Race and The Colors of Us, so that when you're in the grocery store, which none of us have done in the last year with our children, and they say, why is her hair so curly? How come they don't match? We can engage them. We can say, what do you think? And then maybe we can go back to it later on and say, remember when we saw that person in the grocery store? Does he look like the person in this book? How are we the same? How are we different? What do you think about that? Do you think that's why he was treated unfairly? We can discuss shared family values. We can discuss how we want to treat people regardless of them being a boy and a girl. We want to treat people the same, whether they're gay or straight. And we can discuss that we want to treat people based on their race. By elementary school, again, the kids have already internalized the differences. And unfortunately, our children are now having to navigate things like gun shootings, traumatic events, and they're hearing it. They're hearing it from shows, news segments, their friends, radios, teachers, and you or we want to be the filter that our kids process it. So to do so, we have to be intentional, and we have to discuss systemic racism. We have to point out stereotypes. We also have to encourage our children to say something. It can be as simple as, I'm uncomfortable with what you said. I think they can tell their kids, I don't think that's right. They don't have to educate that person, but we need them to stand up. The two videos that I have next to us are both things that have come out in the last year that are exactly lead us as caregivers through these kinds of things, even though we don't want to talk about it. And I can talk about it. So apparently I did do something right. I've got these pictures. I took my kids to see Hidden Figures. We talked about what the women were recognized for. We talked about how even though the guy didn't really care, he really just wanted the work to get done. Things didn't change until the white man, it's always about the white man, took down the bathroom sign. I don't know if you remember it. I don't want to, as Jews, we're used to talking about the Holocaust, and we start pretty early. In Israel, the Holocaust is part of the kindergarten curriculum. So my kids read the book from, I think it was Eva Schloss. There it is, there's the name. I took Jacob, that's his bottom picture. I took the kids to the Holocaust Museum, and you're supposed to sign the book. You're supposed to write something down. And I couldn't believe that he wrote, I won't forget you ever, because we only did Daniel's story. I don't know if you've been there. Kids are listening. And I did take my kids, this is showing some political stuff, to a rally when it was against the Muslim ban. And we talked about Jacob's Muslim friend at the time. And we talked about his responsibility to be an ally.
Sandy?
Yeah.
Can I just add something here that happened in our family that backs up what you're saying? So our kids all went to public school, and we were very celebratory about their having friends of all kinds. And it was a wonderful experience. And we talked a lot about it, like Sandy's saying. And Ian went to HSPVA, and probably a lot of you know that at HSPVA, there happens to be a more significant community of gay and lesbian teens who are out and comfortable expressing themselves than in the other schools where we've sent our kids, just comparing what we've seen. So when prom came around, I asked Ian how many of his friends were going to the proms, same-sex couple. And he was so angry with me for asking. He's like, I can't even believe you're asking that. What does it matter? Why do you care? Like, that's just horrible that you're asking that question. I mean, he really held me to task. And to this day, he still doesn't understand that what I was really asking. And I tried to explain it to him, but he still doesn't really get it because he grew up in a different generation. I said, you know, my friends had to go to prom. My gay friends had to go and hide it. And my prom date was gay and died of AIDS because he had to hide it. So I'm just sharing that because it was a really profound moment in my parenting and my experiences. And I am really proud of him for holding me at task. And I had to really be sure that I didn't get defensive.
It's beautiful, but isn't that the rinse and repeat of parenting? We do nothing right.
Right.
I mean,
Right,
especially in a high schooler, right? I asked
Right.
Jacob,
Thanks for
about
saying
his.
that. I feel better.
I mean, it's how I ask the question. It's what I ask the question. I think it has to be that it's a sensitive subject, and that for him, he was tired of it being sensitive.
Yeah,
He's
you're right.
tired of us saying back in my day. It's beautiful that you have this shared space. And it's actually a very interesting segue into, I think that is the point, that look at this, it's time for us to confront our own bias. And so, you bring up, I hear a lot of parents these days, again, as a pediatrician, I'm trying to help parents raise their children while I can't figure out how to do it myself. And so I'm trying to stay up on all the supportive ways to use the lingo, right? We don't use the word biologically female. We use the word gender assigned at birth, right? Assigned female at birth. We don't, if we're talking about transgendered individuals, and then there's, we have to understand about cisgender, transgender, genderqueer are all different things. I think, again, for children who go to HSPVA, which if you didn't know, Mira's going next year. And I'm ecstatic for her about that. She's going for creative writing. That's the thing, is it's just, she gets so annoyed at me because she has a friend named Cameron who happened to be Grace in elementary school. I know Grace. I remember Grace. I like Cameron, but when I'm trying to remember who Cameron is, fit in, but she is so annoyed. Remember Grace? And I just never met Cameron. I met Grace. So when we're confronting bias, we have to recognize, and it's nice that I have had the conversation with my parents at this time about how race is just something that we didn't discuss, and most of us didn't discuss with our parents. Race is certainly something that my parents were definitely modeled how to treat people evenly. They modeled how to do tikkun olam. They modeled how to be active members of our society, but it wasn't discussed because that's what we thought was supposed to be the right thing to do. We thought it was good to be colorblind. So knowing that that was the lesson, we can't do that anymore. Knowing that our children are seeing it. And Lisa, as far as what you were saying, we want to be the filter that our children understand the world. And sometimes our filter is off. And like you said, you were listening to him and letting him guide you instead of sometimes the parents get to be the guide. But we have to equip ourselves to have the conversations.
Sandy,
So, yes.
may I interrupt for a moment
Yes.
to share something, or I'm happy to wait until you're through with your point.
I don't even know what time it is right now. I think we're doing fine.
Okay, I wanted to share an experience from another generation. When Sandy and I were in college at UT, I grew up in the Air Force, and my dad was sent overseas unaccompanied. So my whole family was living in a really gorgeous high rise in Austin. I left my dorm to move in with my mom and siblings. And during that semester, got involved with a volunteer program between UT students and students from an African-American college in town. And we would go to an economically challenged elementary school, and you could either sign up to do one-on-one tutoring, or with my art background, I worked with one of the college students who was a drama major, and we were going to work with the children to put on The Wizard of Oz. and do props and scenery, all this stuff. It was a wonderful experience. And I think I made really nice friends with some of the students from this other school. So at the end of the year, I asked my mom, I said, Mom, you know, in this fancy high rise where we live with the beautiful swimming pool out back, I'd like to host a special party with all my friends from this group because we made, you know, it was so successful and we so enjoyed working together. And my mother, who loves everybody, who loved everybody, never met a stranger, said, Leslie, I think that's a lovely idea, but I don't think your guests are going to feel comfortable because I don't think the management is going to permit you to have these guests. And of course I asked, why not? That's not fair. And she says, that's just the way it is. And I thought about it and I said, I don't want my friends to be made to feel uncomfortable. So we never had the party. So that's the story I'm sharing. I don't know if other people ever had incidents like that, because growing up, I was always in public school, but in Texas, it was always segregated. And when we lived in Michigan, it was not segregated. So,
So I think, you know, as you talk about that time period, and that was how, again, this is before my time,
right,
that we thought that was the right thing to do. And I'd like to use the word that we no longer can't be racist. We need to be anti-racist.
mhm,
So that's an example of how our world, our society is fundamentally built on racist structures. And if we don't do anything about it, if we are okay with that and we say we don't want to make them feel uncomfortable, that means we're passively endorsing racism. And so I think that is the concept that we need to own in current day 2020. Is the other thing is, and I'll bring up now my experience, you mentioned how you went to UT, you had all the exposure, and you partnered with people from African American college. I went to that school. I went to a historically Black college and university for medical school. And everybody said, oh, are you going to get a scholarship because you're a minority? Oh, isn't that interesting? Oh my gosh, that must be so different. And you know what I learned? I learned I'm white. And I learned that I walk through the world being white. And I have so many Jewish friends that say that's not true. You're Jewish, right? Because they're taught by being in Europe that we weren't white, we weren't Polish, we were Jewish, we weren't Russian, we were Jewish. And that's not the world I live in. That's not my life for the last 41 years. I have white skin. Society sees me for being white. I thought I knew what it was like to be a minority. I get to choose whether to tell people I'm Jewish or not. And so what's interesting is that I have spent so much time. It's been, I can tell you exactly how long it's been since Mira was born the week I graduated. It's been 14 years since I was no longer that special white person. I'm just white. So I don't walk around saying, hey guys, guess what? I went to Morehouse. But when we talk about that our friends won't be comfortable, Black people know what that is like every single day of their life. And if we don't give them the choice, every one of us gets to choose to be in the situations that make us comfortable. And so even though I think I'm such an active ally and I'm working to be anti-racist, what I liked about this is it's hard to correct my mistakes, but when I can identify my biased feelings, I do share them with my children. I have always been in clinics that were predominantly Medicaid until 2.5 years ago. And so not only did I work with a clinic that was predominantly Medicaid, but it was predominant, my last clinic before this was predominantly Latino. and I spoke Spanish, and I was the only white girl, and I was the white girl who spoke Spanish, and that's all they needed, is a happy, smiling white person who actually speaks their language and wants to listen. And then I came to my current clinic, and it's just me. Doesn't matter if I speak Spanish, being white. And I recognized that I had a bias, that people who came to me and were Spanish speaking obviously were poor on the lower socioeconomic scales. And then they had to prove to me that they were educated. I had that association. I didn't realize I had it. So when I recognized that my clinic now, I am exposed to so many different cultures and races and ethnicities and religions because I work near the medical center, that in itself, even though I was worried of being in a higher middle socioeconomic place, is having me confront what are my biases. I've had a culturally diverse social network, but as you're about to see in my pictures, it's still pretty white. I think it is important for us to get involved. And there are still places where our Black friends are uncomfortable. And there are still places where we don't want to call people out on on racist policies. And the more that we can get involved with that, I wanted to mention, this says your place of worship. I don't know if anybody remembers, but there was a family of, I think, 13 people. That's 2 parents and 11 children who were Black and moved to our shul. They've actually moved away in the middle of the pandemic. And 2, maybe I'm wrong, it was 11 people, 2 adults and 9 children. And 2 of those children were Mira and Jacob's ages. And I invited them to Shabbos dinner. Do you know they said they had never, ever been invited to a home for Shabbos dinner? Never. And granted, that's 11 people. That's a lot of people. What kind of message do we send in a shul where we are always doing these interfaith relationships and learning about different cultures and respecting? And when I learned about them, maybe my family can remember, they were actually moved from Marshall, Texas. They were the Jewish family in Marshall, Texas. And I don't remember if I have that city right, but they had to go to a different town to go to shul. And they went to shul with somebody I grew up with in Louisiana. I grew up with in Young Judea. So here I am playing Jewish geography with 11 member Jews by choice. They did convert to Judaism. And who would have thought it? I was totally biased against that. I'm going to call that. You make assumptions. So again, it's easy to say what we did right, but I have to share my biases to talk about what we did wrong. All right. So we've talked, how do we talk to our children? We're confronting ourselves, which I think is such a big thing. And now we've got to teach our children to celebrate their own pride. And this is also something I've struggled with. There's a concept and newer research about race socialization. How do we teach our children, mainly Black children, when you talk about the concept of race socialization? And when we study this, preparing them for biases, warning them, doesn't work very well. Pride and reinforcing having pride in being Black specifically gives us the most pride. So, other people, I think a lot of them I see personally in non-Black minority groups prefer to be silent. And I have to respect that as a pediatrician, as I'm having these conversations. So I assume that as the white pediatrician, when I'm talking to white parents, obviously I'm about to blow their mind. They've never talked to their kids about race. They've never gone out of their way to talk about, rich media or books. That's wrong. And then I also assume that minorities are obviously talking about it because they're used to seeing in the world. And that's wrong. So, what is my identity? My identity is Jewish. And so I don't need to teach my children how our identity is white and Jewish. My identity is being divorced, and my children have to learn for positive, for better or worse. They're the children of divorced parents. And people always say, I'm sorry, or that's horrible. And I tell them, I chose to be married and I chose to be divorced. This is the identity I choose. And Jacob really, a lot of this is all Jacob, since Mira is my introvert. He really, in the last year, was complaining about being divorced. And I said, where is this coming from, bud? It's been 8 years. What are you thinking? And he says, well, mommy, it's just annoying to have to go, back and forth and leave things at different houses. And I said, yeah, that's pretty annoying. But, or Debbie would teach me to say, and also, there are families come in so many different shapes and sizes. There are families with 2 moms, and there are families with 2 dads, and there are families who grew up with 1 grandparent. We have such a great family. You've got 2 parents that love you. And he goes, well, I really think I heard that it's really best to have 2 dads. And I said, why? And he said, because then you're immune from your mama jokes. So then I figured out, okay, the kid's doing okay. The other thing, I think, what is so my identity, that I don't identify about being with a white family, but I do identify about being part of my family. And so in addition to the Judaism, on the bottom right, you'll see us celebrating Chag Rodeo. So every single year, my family descends upon the Houston Rodeo. I'm the only one who lives here in Houston. They have, may she rest in peace, retired the cowgirl that's behind us that we took a picture from. But we have all these quirks that my children are so rich to my children. And I think that really needs to be celebrated, that they are part of my family and what my family looks like. So I think I've already given you a lot of resources. Now I'm going to give you even more. Look for the books. Look for the books for children. Look for the books that aren't for children. If you're not familiar with Jane Elliott and the blue brown eyes exercise, that's a whole nother experience of understanding how the brains of children work. Learn how to be anti-racist. It's not enough to say, I'm not racist. I don't harbor any ill will to people. It's not enough to be a role model. We need to combat the fundamental structures in our life. And as I was looking through all of this, I came upon, I don't know how many people are familiar with this. This was, I think, a master's thesis of Robert Cohen in 1953 to 1954. And it was his explanation of race. He was an anthropologist. He was a film study too. And guess what? Skin color, where does race come from? It comes from melanin. We've got different amounts. There are very few genes. And this gets back to what you were talking about, Shira. This is where race comes from. There are so many other hereditary differences. You may be talking about that. But melanin doesn't contribute to anything. So when people talk about, or when I want to share people, what is my experience? Let me see. This is what I have learned about myself. And I encourage you to learn about your journey. I'm white. When you look at my pictures, my family is white. My children are white. I'm Jewish. That means so many other things, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm white. I identify as a pediatrician, a mother, and in the end, society sees me as being white, and that gives me privilege. And it is my responsibility to understand and share this. And I will continue doing this in my project about my 4-year-old, now 5-year-old friend. So I have even more resources that I used in this talk. I'm happy to, Karen, to share all of them, but there's so much for you guys to look into if you're interested. And there's so many different ways this conversation can happen. But that's what I wanted to share with you today. Debbie.
So I'm Debbie. I'm Sandy's sister, for those of you who don't know me. I am the mother of an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And like Sandy said, we all do it wrong all the time. All of us mothers. I happen to be a mother of young children. I was on a bike ride with 2 of my 3 children 30 minutes before this talk, and I told them we were going to go back to the house and we were going to listen to Aunt Sandy teach a class. And my 8-year-old asked what the class was about. And I said, I used the word anti-racist. And I said, do you know what racism means? And my 8-year-old says, she said, no, she knows what racing is, but she didn't know what racism is. And so I said, when somebody is racist, they treat somebody differently because of their skin color. And she says, you mean like police? And so to Sandy's point, I mean, I try to raise my children intentionally. I know I'm not doing it right, but I try to have these conversations with my young children. And I don't know if I'm doing it right, and I don't know if I'm doing it wrong. And we walk the neighborhood with our dog, and we talk about the Black Lives Matter, and we talk about that some people have the black and white flags with the blue stripe. Why do they have that? And we talk about how they believe that police lives matter. And I believe that, of course, police lives matter, but they don't need to be celebrated. And we need to be more aware of Black Lives Matter. Those are the ones being hurt. Those are the ones being treated unfairly, this and that. And yet, the only thing she knows about racism or somebody who might be racist is police. And that was her immediate association. And I didn't know if I was comfortable with that. And I don't have a point to make with this statement, but the only idea I'm sharing is that even as somebody who's trying to have intentional conversations with my children who are younger than Sandy's children, there's still all sorts of garble happening in their brains, and you don't know if you're saying all the right things. And it's challenging. It's an ongoing challenge, I guess, is my only point.
So the pediatrician response is correct. That's, you handled that great. So in a few days or whenever you want, go back to that and bring it up on your own terms. Figure out what you want to say. And then say, hey, remember when you brought that up? What do you think about that? Do you think that's right? Why did that come up in your head? Kids need to be talked to at their level. You're going to mess it up. But that's the point, is that this is an ongoing conversation. And to your credit, and my credit too, but to get on my parents that I've already talked about, the truth is, my first memory of being a witness to racial injustice isn't until my 9th grade, until my first year of debate. And I'm sure my mom knows exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the point is, I was prepared. I was prepared as an anti-racist for it. When the white debate teacher looked at my debate partner and said, you'll never be able to win nationals. There's never been a Black national champion. Not going to happen.
And we talked about it, and I said, hey, that's not right. And she said, hey, that's not right. And we got up and we walked out together. And I didn't know that my mother called her mother afterwards. I didn't know that they were professionals. I think one of them was a lawyer. I don't know if they were both lawyers. Again, they are very accomplished people. And my mother, because she's doing what she's trying to do, I think you were calling to like check on the girl's feelings and everything. I remember you saying that the mother just dismissed it, like wasn't a big deal. Like, this happens to us all the time. I'm not going to raise any hell with the school. We don't need to do this. So at least you're having the conversation now. I didn't even have the conversation, but I had the skills, and I know that my parents modeled that and prepared me to give this talk. And so I think we are making progress.
I think this has been just amazing. Just really well done, Sandy. And I'm really proud that you're Emily and Brian's pediatrician, because that means that they're going to get all this stuff from you. So I'm really happy with that. And just as, you know, I'm in the middle, there are people in this room who have a lot of grandchildren and older kids than mine. But I guess what I found is that, you know, for all the mistakes we make, as long as we keep the dialogue going, we'll get it right eventually. It's not just one conversation, it's many of them together. And I don't know, I'd be interested in hearing like Judy and Leslie and what you all think about that.
Well, I know David just raised his hand.
So I'm not sure if my comments are appropriate, but I'm going to share them anyway. So we came from a country that embraced apartheid to the hilt. And yet, when we grew up, when my late wife and I got married, we decided we weren't going to have any help. We didn't feel it was right to, on one hand, to have help. That was a privileged situation. On the other hand, it was perhaps wrong not to want that, because it did provide jobs for people who didn't have jobs and provided some level of income. And we started off life like that. And when my wife was pregnant with our first child, she keeled over when we were driving back from vacation. And we kind of took a hard look at stuff and said, you know what, we have to get some help. So we employed a Black woman who was essentially all help to us, both for our two kids while we were in South Africa, as well as helping with the housework. She lived on premises. We provided a room, board, food, and everything, paid her. So my kids grew up with a Black woman who they adored. And then when they were 4 and 5, we came to this country, and, you know, like, well, maybe not like everybody else, but we happened to move into a part of Houston which is predominantly white. At the time they went to elementary school, there were very few Black kids in the class. It was predominantly white. It's very different now at the same school. And they grew up, and we tried to encourage them to be, that everybody can be a friend. Doesn't matter what the color of their skin was. And I think they've done a really good job of doing that. The challenge that I see for my grandkids is that my daughter lives in a community that is, I'm going to say, probably 99% white. And there's nothing that she can do about it. That's where she lives. That's where the kids go to school. They do have kids in the classes who come from other parts of the world, but there are very few Black kids in the class. It's not that they haven't been exposed to them. I just don't think they have the same exposure or the issues that you were alluding to in your talk. My question to you is, at ages 6 and 9, can we still get them to think that way, the way you described?
So we live in a segregated society. No matter how integrated it is, we live in a segregated society, whether it's economical or racial. And that's where books, videos, and media come in. And that's where the purposeful bringing up these windows into other people's lives, seeing the diverse stories. One of the slides I have for the later elementary school age, about those books. Again, I can email this out. I'm happy to do all of that, but we have to have that conversation. That this is not, and this is, we need to expose people about the Asian Pacific Islanders, and which is different than South Asian. And what you also bring up is that a lot of this is what I just talked about is to our American lives. So we are a different race conscious society than, I'm assuming, South Africa. I don't know where you're from.
Yeah.
And so, what is it? Trevor Noah is very vocal about how he's Black here and he's white in South Africa. So there's all those different nuances, and there's intersectionality. But if you're asking me as a pediatrician, the answer is books and media. And after George Floyd's death, what I did with my children, and it was, in the COVID pandemic, is we watched an hour of something every day as a family. And I told them, you know what, that's it. You guys get to pick, but we're gonna watch something about racial justice, to promote racial justice. And they came up with things that I never would have come up with. And I asked them to bring it up. So that was how I opened the conversation with them. Again, my son is 11, and we watched the sports things. And when I talked to people about that, they said, oh, that's the white narrative, right? There's a movie called like The Blind Side about a white mother who, supports this Black child. I didn't care. We were having the discussion. We watched All American, about the differences between the lives of, which both of them are true stories. So the resources are out there, is what I have to say. And it's even richer for you to talk about the history of South Africa, because history isn't what is taught in the textbooks. We have to find those resources to provide our children with the real history, and not the history that white people have written about for the classrooms.
Will you share this presentation with the resources?
Absolutely, absolutely, because there are resources I know throughout, but I'm happy to also dial it down.
Sandy,
Yes.
first and foremost, I cannot tell you how proud I am of you. Knowing you as a young teenager and knowing the wonderful things you did then and how you influenced my daughter, youth group, whatever, and your parents and family, just absolutely wonderful. Gems of our congregation. So sad when you all moved. Very, very a loss for our congregation. And I thank you for sharing all this incredible information, education, viewpoint. This was not available when I was growing up, and not so much when my children were growing up. I thought we always presented, everyone is equal, you need to be nice to everybody and they should be nice to you, whatever. My childhood mantra was, but it's not fair. And my parents never said, but Leslie, life isn't fair. Well, that's not fair. So I'm hoping to take this information share it with my family, my grandchildren. I love to hear what they have to say because it comes out, pearls of wisdom, and you just never know. But thank you for organizing this with CBS Women. Very, very proud, my dear, very proud.
Yeah, actually, I want to thank you for that. I actually wanted to pipe in. I just looked at the time. It is after 1. Obviously, if people need to go on with their day, no one's going to think bad of you. Thank you for giving this your hour. I don't know how much time Sandy has to take questions.
I have no children, so I got a baseball game at 6.
All right, super. And then my other question is, I am still recording, and if people want to ask more personal questions, I can stop recording. So if even one person wants me to stop recording, I will do so. Otherwise, I'll let it roll.
I want to add something. As Leslie said, we raised our children in a different era, and at that point, being colorblind was kind of the guidance. So we treated everybody fairly, and we treated everybody equally, but we didn't talk about it as much until, as Sandy referred to, it became a problem. But our experience was, we grew up in New Jersey. I didn't think about race, but when we moved to Houston, it was really noticeable that there were people in the supermarkets that looked different than we did. And it wasn't until being confronted with that I realized the people in the New Jersey supermarkets all looked the same. I didn't realize we were shopping in white grocery stores until I came to Houston and found out all grocery stores were all different colors, and it was fabulous. And when Sandy, our kids were in Jewish day schools, they were all white. Didn't think about that until Sandy went to Bel Air, and kids were every different color there is. From tan to the blackest of black. And she brought home this incredible mixture of friends that just enriched her life and our life tremendously. But hi, kitty cat. But my thought here is that, what do we do about Jewish day schools? Jewish day schools are probably going to be 90-something% white. And part of us thinks it's a good idea to, have kids in the Jewish day schools, but they miss the exposure to people who have different backgrounds and different home life and cultures and all kinds of other very, very rich differences. So I'm just throwing that out as a challenge of people who are committed to the Jewish community. What do we do when so much of our time is immersed in the Jewish community, which tends to be pretty homogeneous?
It's not just the Jewish community. My daughter lives in the Woodlands, and she had an experience of, I think it was an 11 or 12-year-old child that had never seen a black person until that age. And that's not Jewish.
And I think, I guess there's a few ways, and the answer is you talk and you expose. But I think Jewish schools, therefore, have to have the education of structural racism. We need to give our kids the dialogue. We need to give our kids the language. The decision to go to a Jewish school has to do with where your identity is and what the lesson is you want to give your children. And so hearing you talk about that timeline makes a lot more sense why I didn't see anything until Bel Air. But Bel Air was interesting in how that biased me, because I was judged to be part of the cultural diversity group. And I remember looking around for a friend, and another friend said, who are you looking for? And he goes, well, I knew the cultural diversity group was going to lunch, but I didn't hear the Jew was going. And he was joking about it. But the point is that my group, I wasn't thrown into just, it was Houston upon Houston. So my South Indian friend got in trouble seriously because she talked to North Indians. There was conflict between who was going to sell falafel between the Muslim Student Association, or the not Muslim, Arabic Student Association, and the Hebrew Student Association. And all the rules were in place because there was price wars about egg rolls between the Chinese and the Japanese student associations. So I went from nothing to holy cow, and that's still not the world that we live in right now. So you made up for the first 13 years for that. But my experience is a lot of why I want my children to go to public school. And my father has learned to accept that my children have a different level of knowledge of Hebrew and Torah than they would have if they gone to a Jewish private school, but they have their identity.
But your daughter reads Torah all the time, which is fabulous.
But she doesn't understand it.
Oh.
And you know, when I read Torah, because of that background, it makes sense to me, and my trip is easier because I can tell the story. I'm so blessed, and I'm so happy that that child is this annoying thing in my side. What day are we reading Torah this month, mommy? I'm like, come on, didn't we read Torah last month? Which she has. She's read every single month since her bat mitzvah. And Shira, this last Shabbos was her bat mitzvah portion. So, but that's the point, is I've given my child her Jewish identity for her to do it with it, what she wants. So David, see, this didn't become a thing until I was 13. So you've got plenty of time. Yeah, I have to talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll with the kids. And I have a big Orthodox community that comes and sees me. And they say, you know, when are you going to talk about it? Because, you know, we're from the Orthodox community. I'm like, I don't care. But you don't get to say that. And my answer to them, just for example, I love to share this story, is when I was doing a 16-year-old checkup of a girl in my special needs clinic. So there was a lot of other stuff going on, and she was so uncomfortable with anything private. So I said, okay, you know what? Today we're not going to talk about it. But the next time you come, I'm going to bring you back next week, and we're going to talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll. And she said, what's rock and roll? So I need to have the buy-in from the parents. And so, for example, for the synagogue to do that kind of thing, we would just need to have permission from the parents of the ideas that I'm putting into kids' minds, because the kids, they already got it, right? They're already hearing everything. And it's the conversation with the parents that is essential. And so it would be something with kids and parents, I guess, would be my recommendation. And that's where those videos are amazing. Again, it's already set up in the talk, Karen. I can just play the videos. I learned all sorts of fun things about Keynote yesterday.
Fantastic. Okay, then Shira's got one more.
She's saying hi.
Saying goodbye.
Saying
thank you. This was fabulous.
Yeah, this was fabulous.
Thank you.
Leslie's also saying goodbye. Fabulous, fabulous, and a wonderful, wonderful program for CBS Women and for everybody. I'm really hoping this is going to spread in a variety of ways wherever possible. Take care.
I think what my niece and nephew need me to stay on. Where were you? Did you just get home?
I was having special daddy time.
Special daddy time. What did you do on Special Daddy Day?